fellow Falcoholics. What is up? Welcome to the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Knight, at Falcoholic Kevin, joined today by a very special guest, becoming a bit of a frequent guest now, maybe even getting into friend of the show territory, Daniel Flick, at DFlick Draft. So, Daniel, how we doing?
You know what? Very, very good today. I don't know. I feel kind of refreshed. It's been, what's today? Tuesday. We're 3 days removed. I'm not sure when this is going to air. Apologies. But it's, we're a few days removed from the draft by now. Feeling a lot more refreshed than I was Saturday night on the live show. But you know what? I'm very glad I'm in friend of the show territory now. It's a very big accomplishment. I might add that one onto my Twitter bio. So
yeah. It's big. It's a serious thing, obviously, to be a friend of this illustrious podcast, to steal a line from Aaron Freeman there. But anyone who comes on, the day 3 draft party instantly gets, taken up the rankings, because that, especially late in the day, because they kept us there the entire time, basically. So appreciate you pinch hitting on multiple draft shows at this point. But yeah, guys, we're going to be getting into this Falcons draft class. Got a little UDFA talk too, now that we know the 6 players that the Falcons have brought in an undrafted free agency. So that's got all that good stuff to look forward to before we take off. Want to thank today's sponsor, betonline.ag, your number one source for all your sports betting needs, including info, stats, news, and scores. You can get the latest odds and lines for this year's ongoing NBA playoffs. You can also bet on NFL futures, including the Falcons, if you're particularly spicy on Atlanta's chances to win the NFC South or NFC Championship, or even the Super Bowl if you're really, really, really spicy. But no matter what you decide to do, BetOnline is always your sports information headquarters this season, as they've got you covered for all your sports wagering needs: basketball, MLB, NHL hockey, right to UFC and boxing. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info, including live betting options and your favorite casino and card games you can play right from your home. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Be sure to use our promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. Daniel, I know you came into this show with some takes to unleash on our Lord and Savior Bijan Robinson, who we talked about at length before the pick was made. I think we can pat ourselves on the back for that one. So good job, us. But please, I know you have something prepared, some prepared statements. So please continue.
I do. I hope I remember it all. But I do have a few high points that I want to hit on here with Bijan. To me, I've seen obviously a lot of people that have said things like you can't draft a running back in the top 10. To me, that is extremely close-minded. It's for me, it's like, what's the point of the evaluation process if you're going in saying I can't draft this guy in the top 10 because he plays XYZ position? It's especially for me when you look at Bijan, how special of a football player he is, not even just as a running back. I think he's an outstanding football player who happens to have the tag of being a running back. I think he'll be used in ways that it's not just where he's a running back. But if you look at the way that the draft unfolded, you've got Carter on the board still. You've got Christian Gonzalez on the board still. You've got a few other offensive linemen on the board still. But if you're talking about BPA, you've got a defensive tackle in Carter who, as we've now learned, the UGA coaching staff did not deliver very high marks on him, apparently, on top of some of the other off-the-field stuff that happened in the lead-up to the draft. The Falcons, obviously, you've got the whole, Watson situation last offseason. But apart from that, this Falcons regime has kind of stayed away from, people with off-field problems, right? And so I think that's part one that we have to really look at and consider there, that if you're talking about drafting a guy at 8, you have to make sure that guy is a culture fit. And they evidently, Carter was not that guy for them. And then you look at, Oregon corner, shout out Christian Gonzalez, right? There's been teams who've talked about competitive edge with him. And again, you listen to everything that Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot have said, and it's smart, tough, competitive. They are really putting an emphasis on tough and competitive in every draft pick that they've made pretty much throughout their entire 3 years. Gonzalez, evidently, there's a lot of teams who felt like he didn't check that box. And so again, if you're drafting a guy at 8, he's got to check every box that you have. You are making an entire draft class around that player. And so then, you look beyond that, and the overall argument of positional value, let's talk about player value. Sure, he's a running back, but if we're being conservative, he's probably a top 3 player in the draft. If we're being aggressive, he's probably top 1, top 2 players in the draft, and you draft him at pick 8. That's very good value in terms of overall draft value. I think that's very important to look at as well. And then you look beyond that, if you're not drafting Carter, you're not drafting Christian Gonzalez, who else are you going to draft at 8? You can argue pass rusher. Who's there that's going to impact your team as much this year as Bijan Robinson is? If there's a guy that you can look at and you can say, okay, that guy can become a Pro Bowl pass rusher, I think it's all projections with who is there on the board. With Bijan, I think if you're looking at who's going to positively impact your team this year and for the next 4 to 5 years, I'm not sure there was a player on the board who will bring you more wins than what Bijan Robinson will bring the Falcons throughout probably his entire Falcons tenure. But that's my personal take on it. And then especially, if you look at the offensive linemen, the Falcons got very good value, as we've since learned with Matthew Bergeron, with the Cowboys, potentially taking him at the end of the first round. That's a good value pick where the Falcons got him. Whereas, again, you take one at 8, are they going to help you win games as much as what Robinson will? That's my personal take on it. I think they drafted a player who fit every box that they had to check there. And I think they drafted a player who's going to help them win the most games, not only this year, but for the next 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of the Bijan pick. And you think about stuff that we were hearing today on Tuesday, where we're basically getting close to the deadline for 5th-year options to be picked up for the 2020 class. And just 6 of the top 10 picks had their 5th-year options picked up. And if you extend that to the rest of the first round, only, I believe, 13 of 32, which is definitely the worst, I think, in recent history of the first-round picks have had their 5th-year options picked up. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, only 13 of the players were good, but it definitely says something about teams wanting to commit to them in a big way for injury or other reasons. So I think people really underrate the value of just hitting on your first round pick. Like it's not a given even in the top 10. Only 6 out of 10 in 2020 had their 5th-year options picked up. The Falcons just traded for a guy in Jeff Okudah who didn't, a top 3 pick, right? Who didn't. And Jeff Okudah is a poor example because I think everyone probably would have told you that Okudah was one of the can't miss guys. And I think his struggles have had more to do obviously with injury, and that's something you just can't really predict. But just in the name of getting a good player, I think it's really underrated. I think everyone tries to really game the system and try to maximize, value and positional value and surplus value on the cap and all this stuff. And that's all great but the player has to be good for any of it to matter. And I think it's just getting a good player, period, is a big deal. And it's not something you get every single year in the first round. And certainly not past the first round. And Bijan being, I think, a top 3 talent in the class, one of the safest, cleanest, whatever you want to say, prospects out there. There's something to be said for just going with the layup, the easy pick, and I think it's sort of reductive to even say that he was the safest guy, because I think he's one of the highest ceiling players as well. And I think the Falcons have a real opportunity to sort of shift the narrative on running backs high, especially if they're serious about what they've said, which is that they don't view him as a running back. They view him as an offensive weapon, like an offensive chess piece guy. And I think that this is their opportunity to sort of show that, hey, running backs maybe matter more than people think, especially with the way that the defenses have shifted to lighter boxes and, more DBs on the field. The Falcons are, like we've talked about it, the Falcons are sort of going away from 11 personnel and all these wide receivers to the point where they didn't even take a wide receiver in this draft. And they're sort of de-emphasizing that position to a very high degree. And it's sort of sacrilege to a lot of NFL front offices and to a lot of evaluators. They're like, what are the Falcons doing? They're just wasting they're wasting Kyle Pitts and Drake London by going with Desmond Ridder, that bum, they can't seem to fathom that, like, it's all intentional and that they must just be incompetent. So they'll have an opportunity to prove people wrong, that they are doing something not only intentional, I think it's obviously intentional. It just doesn't sync up cleanly with what the NFL consensus, which everyone's trying to copy the good teams, and only a couple of those teams actually have ended up being good. People tried to copy the Patriots for 20 years, but it rarely ever worked out. Maybe there's something to be said for blazing your own trail and trying to do something a little bit different, and take some teams off guard, with this really interesting offense that I think even if it doesn't work out, it's going to be exciting to watch them try to piece this thing together with all of these pieces they have here.
Yeah, if nothing else, watching the film back Sunday night, Monday morning will be fun, which obviously for us on the media side is always going to be a big positive. For that alone, I would call it a home run pick at 8 with Bijan. But no, I feel like he touched on a lot of really, important things there. And I don't think enough people are going to give the Falcons credit for being bold and being, creative in the way that they're trying to go about team building. And, as you said, there's kind of like a cookie cutter approach to team building that everyone's like, you have to follow, this approach. You have to draft a running, or you shouldn't draft a running back in the top 10, or, you should draft a pass rusher, a quarterback, whatever it might be, premium positions. If you're the Falcons and you have a vision for how you want your team to be run, and you have a clear identity that you're trying to build, draft players who can positively impact that identity and that culture early, especially when you just spent, I think the total number was over $200 million across the length of every contract that they handed out this offseason. They're going for it, and they're going about it their way. And I don't think you can praise Terry Fontenot, Arthur Smith, and the entire staff enough for their willingness to have a vision and to say, we don't care what other people think. We're going to do it our way. And we have faith that our way will work out. I guess it's kind of like what I was saying earlier. Everybody, I feel like I've seen a lot of people who've said, if you can draft, a pass rusher is going to have way more value in the long run than Robinson at 8. That's great. But what pass rusher was there at 8 that is going to fit the bill that you're trying to fit them into? There really wasn't anybody on the board. Obviously you've got Carter inside, but then you're kind of getting into a whole other positional value thing there, because you've got Onyemata, you've got Jarrett locked up for the next several years on, I think, probably $70 million between the two of them. Then you add in Carter. That's inside. We're talking more outside pass rush here, though, as a whole, as far as pick 8, right? And so to me, with Bijan, value of him as an individual and as an offensive weapon obviously checks out. You put on the tape. I mean, there's a viral clip that's been out there of him. I think he ran a slot post last year against Iowa State, makes a heck of a catch over the middle while he's getting hit. I mean, he's put it on tape. He's put several other very impressive catches on tape and has proven that he can really catch the football. Very natural. And again, that's the vision the Falcons have, is to be positionless. And we're going to run the football, but we also have offensive weapons, so pretty much Arthur Smith has talked, at length about, we want to be as, multiple as we can be. And they go out there, and he was talking the other day about how between Kyle Pitts, you got London, you got Jonnu Smith, you've got Algier, you've got Robinson. He said we can pretty much line up an empty 11, 12, whatever it might be, 22 if they want to. And they can make it as creative as they want to, throw the same personnel at you and throw it in 3 to 4 types of looks. I mean, it's going to be a rough week for coordinators trying to prepare for that. And I don't think you can, talk enough about them seeing a vision and then making that vision happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And there'll be a lot of opportunity for the Falcons to make a lot of people eat their words this season. I hope they can follow through on it. But again, it is a risky approach. It is sort of an untested approach, and maybe it blows up in their face. But we're here. We're Falcons fans, right? We're gonna assume that it's gonna work, because assuming that it doesn't work is boring, and that's loser mentality. Okay, like we'll let the haters do that. Okay, we're not haters on this pod. We're gonna try to take a more positive outlook. But I do think that it is the ideas they're presenting and going with, I think, are intriguing. I think there's a clear case to be made that what they're doing is actually smart, like by not putting all their eggs into an elite pass rusher, either at the top of the draft or in free agency, and instead taking this approach of let's get 4 guys that we know are all better than the other pass rushers we had last year, and we're going to add them all, and cumulatively we're going to have a better pass rush because every single player on our defensive front is better than they were last year, and every single pass rusher, Ebiketie we expect to be better coming back for his second year. Obviously they did return Lorenzo Carter, but they also brought in Calais Campbell, who's still really effective. They brought in Bud Dupree, who hasn't been healthy, but he's only two seasons removed from 8 sacks, and the year before that 11.5 sacks. So if he has finally had a chance to get healthy, at this point he's like the 4th pass rusher. So they have a lot of guys. They're resilient to injuries at this point. In terms of if they lose a guy for a short period of time, they've got another very capable player ready to step in. That's not just some practice squad guy, which is where they were last year. So I'm interested to see how that plays out, and we'll obviously, unfortunately, the Jalen Carter and Bijan Robinson will be tied together forever in the minds of UGA fans, Falcons fans, whoever. And I think there's a scenario where both guys play really well, but I don't think the Falcons are going to be overly upset with the Bijan pick at any point, especially after he's chosen jersey number 7. So I think we can officially get his Hall of Fame fittings now. We'll just update those in 10, 15 years, but I think he's gonna make people very happy. But this is a very pro Bijan pod, but we probably should talk about the other draft picks too, because unlike some people, we realize the draft is more than just the first round. So second pick surprised a lot of people. Didn't surprise Adnan and I, because we predicted it on the last mock draft. We didn't predict the exact trade up, but we did predict that they would take Bergeron at 44. They end up trading up to 38, giving up pick 110 in that move. But Bergeron's an interesting guy. What do you think about that selection?
Yeah, I actually also had that in my final mock. So apparently the Falcons were a little bit too predictable. That was the only pick that I got right, and I officially will be retiring from mock drafting until March of 2024. So anyways, yeah, I think very, very good football player is obviously the very first thing you have to, mention. Obviously, he went number 38 for a reason. But I think a lot of people have lost, just how much Matthew Bergeron was valued around the NFL. There were reports that obviously, yesterday came out, the Cowboys were very fond of him at pick number 26. Like, it was literally 50-50 down to the last few minutes in their war room. Apparently Cincinnati at pick 28, I believe, was also very high on him. I mean, we've got 2 teams here who are in the playoffs, who, are pretty much perennial playoff teams nowadays, who are heavily considering him at the end of the first round. And I mean, you kind of look in and he starts falling a little bit on, in round 2. He's a great fit for what the Falcons want to do. I mean, obviously he played tackle at Syracuse, but I mean, even back as far as I remember his pro day, there were reports coming out of like, hey, the NFL views him as a wide zone offensive guard. Falcons are a wide zone heavy team who needed a left guard. They got that in Matthew Bergeron. They got a guy who can really finish blocks. Again, smart, tough, competitive, fits everything the Falcons want, high character off the field. I mean, he played, obviously, football in Canada for several years, which is a very interesting, the way they play football in Canada is very interesting. But obviously, he's played American football now for 4. Syracuse was his only offer out of college, and he became the first freshman to start at offensive tackle in like 17 years there. I mean, again, with no American football experience, all of that. So, I mean, he's a very unique talent, I feel like. And, a lot of times you look at tackle converts into guard, and it's a lot of guys who, perhaps are not that athletic as far as, lateral range outside, whatever it might be, whether it be short arms, whatever. Matthew Bergeron has the athletic and physical profile to play tackle. And I think that's very important, especially in the long run. But, for now, you've got a guy who will, from pretty early on in his career, be a very, very athletic left guard, one of the more athletic left guards in the league. I think he's, again, when you draft Robinson at pick 8 and you follow that up with him in round 2, you've got 2 guys who are just going to help you establish an identity up front. And it's really just, again, it's furthering the idea of like, hey, we know that what we want to do, and we're going to do it anyways. Have fun stopping it. I mean, they've got 5 offensive linemen now locked up through at least 2024. 4 out of the 5 offensive line spots are now locked up through 2025. They've got talent, they've got physicality, they've got toughness, and they've got a lot of guys who are under control on the offensive line. And I don't think, you can – I don't think you can hate on the philosophy there at all. I really think, it's a regime that is stressed. We are going to be physical up front, and we want to win games up front. And the offensive line now being set the way that it is with the talent that's on that line, I think there's a very fair chance the Falcons have one of the best offensive lines in football for the next several years, which is, when's the last time that happened, right? Really, they have – that is crucial. And, for that, with the value of where they got Matthew Bergeron, I think it was a very good pick.
Yeah, I've gotten to see Bergeron play. I live in Syracuse. My wife is a professor at Syracuse, so we go, Syracuse occasionally, get to some games out here. Shout out to the new stadium. They renovated the dome after all those years, but just everyone raves about Matthew Bergeron. Coaches love him. 39 starts, has played left and right tackle. All the things you mentioned, at tackle, I think he was an 8.7 RAS. At guard, he's in the 9s, right? High 9s. So elite athlete. Will remind you of Chris Lindstrom in terms of that he has tackle size, but is playing guard and is an elite athlete there. And, the upside, of course, is that the Falcons do get two of the better guards in the NFL. And it helps when one can be on a rookie contract, obviously, too. And his upside long-term at tackle is certainly there. I think having him play guard initially takes a lot of the pressure off and mitigates some of his weaknesses dealing with speed around the outside. Because it's not really athletic limitations there. It's just technical stuff. It's punch timing. It's hand placement. And when you're working in a smaller area on the interior, it can help simplify that stuff early on. But like you said, the fact that he came in from Canadian football and immediately started at tackle in Division I NCAA, in the ACC, I think it gives you a lot of faith that this is a really smart player, a fast learner. I think he is the prohibitive favorite for left guard, even though he hasn't played guard probably since he got to the United States. He looked really natural at it at the Senior Bowl. Didn't really have any issues when he had to play on the inside there. And at tackle, he was also one of the best players at the Senior Bowl. So we know how they value that. And I think he's definitely one that I think shouldn't have surprised fans as much as I think it did. It's continuing to build a strength and filling one of the biggest holes on the roster with a premium talent, a fringe first round talent, I would say. And I'm really excited to see how he develops. I think he's going to really, really impress people, and people will come around on this one. I know people didn't love the trade up, but I think with the context and knowing the Falcons needed to get in front of both the Panthers and the Saints, who both had interior offensive line needs, to make sure that he's in Atlanta and not there. So I think if people understand the teams they had to move in front of, they would also understand why they felt the need to do that. And also real quick, with people are like, why didn't you just draft Osiris Torrance later? He's not a scheme fit. We've talked about this, guys. He's a man, power gap scheme guard. And he's a really good one, but the reason he fell is because he isn't scheme versatile. He's a man gap power scheme guard, and he needs to go to a power run team. And it's just there aren't as many of those teams in the NFL anymore. It's mostly zone now. Now every team's going to run some power concepts. The Falcons certainly still do, but in terms of primary fit, he's not going to be able to hit those landmarks that the Falcons are asking Chris Lindstrom to hit. And the Falcons want to have that versatility on both sides, both guard positions, that they can trust Bergeron or Lindstrom to run the same play mirrored and not worry about that one of those guys can't hit the landmarks that they need. So, I think fans are going to be really happy with this in time. So give it a chance, guys.
Yeah.
If you have something else to add, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to add it in particular. I feel like a lot of people have overlooked the fact that they jumped in front of two NFC South teams, right? And obviously, we'll kind of see in a few years here how that ends up working out. But would you rather play against him twice a year or have him on your team for 17? I think personally, the way that he's built, the way that he plays football, and the way that he has played football for 4 years at a Power 5 school, and the way that he's – because, obviously you mentioned playing inside at the Senior Bowl. that was, I believe he said on his press conference call, that was the first time that he played inside. And he said, obviously it wasn't great at the start, but he said he got better like every snap, and by the end of the day, it was like, I'm way better, obviously. And obviously it's kind of what you'd expect. But I mean, it was clear progress, clear growth. He's a very quick learner. And, as you said, that he looked pretty natural there too. And so I think, it's kind of like with Bijan. You see a guy that's got a fairly high floor, but you see with the athletic traits and obviously all the intangible stuff that he has as well, very high upside as well. And I think that's really crucial in your top 50 picks, right? And I mean, I really I've said this a bunch, and I'm sure people are really tired of this by now, but you have to have a vision for how you want your team to look. And, I feel like with the moves the Falcons made in free agency, a lot of those moves had a clear vision with it. And I think when you look at starting with Robinson and Matthew Bergeron, you can see that the vision only strengthened in the draft. And so I thought that was a very big statement to make early. And I thought it ended up being, a very, very smart move to jump to NFC South teams as well. I feel like in the moment, a lot of people thought it was for a pass rusher. Keon White was a guy, I think a lot of people, it would not have shocked me if they drafted Keon White. And, obviously, I mean, it'll be kind of fun to see how his career plays out. Obviously, we're for sure cheering for him, for Carter, for all the other guys out there who, the Falcons passed up on, but it'll be fun to kind of compare their careers in the long run. But I do think Matthew Bergeron made a lot of sense for the Falcons on the field, off the field, and should be a very, kind of, as you said, a very impact player early for them. I think he's got the inside track at winning the starting left guard job pretty early in camp. Obviously it's up for grabs, but I do think there's pretty good reason to believe that he can be on the field week 1.
Yeah. And the thing with Keon White that a lot of people don't necessarily realize is he was a very old rookie, quote unquote old, being 25 already, whereas Bergeron just turned 23 like a month ago. So, and Bergeron's not like the youngest rookie either, but those few years of development time mean a lot, and they mean a lot for your second contract. Whereas Keon White is coming up for his extension at age 29, Bergeron's coming up for it, at age 27. So that's a big difference in terms of when you're planning to re-sign this second round pick that you're hoping is a key member of your team. And it shouldn't mean you don't draft a guy, but it might lead to them getting pushed down the board, and we saw that with Keon White. So it's definitely, White is a guy that I think is going to be a good player too. But I think there's a lot of reasons why Bergeron makes more sense for them, especially given the depth chart on the interior offensive line. But quick word on that. Those reserve spots on the interior are going to be feisty because that group, there's a lot of guys in there now. Mayfield, obviously Matt Hennessy's, I'm sure, still going to be in the mix at left guard. And then you've got like Jovaughn Gwyn, who they drafted later, who we'll talk about, and Kyle Hinton, who they signed, and I mean, there's a lot of guys there now. Justin Schaefer, so some of those guys will make the roster, and maybe one or two will make the practice squad. But there's going to be cuts to that group. So I like what they're doing there, where they're saying like, all right, we brought in a bunch of guys we like. Now it's survival of the fittest. So let's see who we love, right? So
Ryan Neesmith too. He's your guy.
Newsflash. Yeah, no, he is my guy. Spoiler alert for the roster projection. He's still my guy. But that'll be coming next Monday, folks. Stay tuned for that. But third round, you talk about upside, another upside pick, another trench pick in Zach Harrison, the edge rusher from Ohio State. Conveniently, people are like, well, what the Falcons doing? They didn't address the pass rush. I mean, they added another top 75 edge rusher. They now have 3, on the roster over the past 2 years. So Zach Harrison, obviously the production wasn't outstanding. I think it's better than people think. It's not like he didn't produce at all. Like, he produced similar numbers to Jalen Carter. Obviously, Jalen Carter's an interior player, so it's not exactly the same. But former like top 5 overall prospect in the country, ridiculous 36-inch arms, length, all that stuff. How do you like the Zach Harrison pick?
Yeah, that was kind of the one for me that I graded a little bit lower of the top ones. And obviously immediately after draft grades are very important, of course. But
very meaningful,
very, very meaningful. But no, I mean, with Zach Harrison, I think One of the interesting things about him, for me, that is not at all relevant to anything, I just wanted to point this out. He was a captain in 2021 and then wasn't a captain in 2022, which is kind of rare, but, obviously still a very high character individual. But I think when you look at Zach Harrison, as you kind of mentioned, the production there, he was second team All Big Ten in 2020 and 2021 and was first team All Big Ten in 2022. The raw production numbers it's not going to blow you away, but he's still a guy who was an impactful player at a high major program for 3 consecutive years after being a 5-star all everything recruit. And I don't really think you can stress enough how important it is to have played in those big games and on those big stages and produce at a very good level. He had a lot of really good matchups with the left tackle from UGA, who went, I think, number 14 to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, Broderick Jones.
Yeah. So there was a lot of good matchups there, right? And so to me, you look at Harrison, you look at a guy, 6'6", 274, arms that are 36 inches, huge wingspan, ran a 4.6 40. He's got all the physical tools. He has all the talent. And if you hear what he had to say, you hear what Arthur Smith had to say, this is a player that they feel is legitimately trending in the right direction and has been trending since about halfway through his senior year. He's a guy, a lot of people I read, evaluators from elsewhere around the league have said, around halfway of his senior year, it's like the light kind of popped on for him. I think there's a very good chance that he outplays his draft spot. And I think it's also very important when you have a player with his upside that you look at the room that he's entering. And you've got, obviously, Ryan Nielsen, tremendous coach up front. Proved it in New Orleans time and again. You've got, obviously, a lot of veterans there with, as you mentioned earlier, you've got Calais Campbell. You've got Onyemata inside, who's going to be a part of that room. You've got a bunch of other guys. I guess Zoe Carter kind of got mixed into there as well. He's another guy you could probably point to as a leader on the edge. You've got a bunch of veterans in there who are legitimate leaders for them that they feel are kind of fostering a positive environment for growth. And so to me, there's, as you mentioned, there's been people who have why didn't they address the pass rush? They added 21 sacks, I believe.
21 and a half.
Yeah.
Between the half in there.
between 4 players, 21 and a half alone, I believe, tops or matches what the Falcons had last year as a team. And you look at this. Okay. Calais Campbell had 14 quarterback hits last year alone, which would have been, I believe, second or third on the Falcons roster last year. Right. This is a guy, you might say, well, he's getting older. Sure, but he's still productive. You know what you're getting in him. You know what you're getting. You're getting a guy who will significantly, all of the moves that the Falcons made are going to raise the floor of that pass rush to where you're probably looking at a unit that should get at least 35 sacks next year, which is going to be, that alone almost matches what they've done the last 2 years. And so Zach Harrison will not be asked to play right away. He's in a very good environment, I think, with, all of the other veterans on that line with him, with a coaching staff that is led by a guy who has proven that he can develop talent up front. And Zach Harrison is extremely talented. And so to me, it's a very good fit, a very natural fit, and one that I think could lead to him vastly outplaying his draft selection.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right about that. And I don't know where this perception that people think he's just not good or is completely raw. He didn't blow up the sack sheet, but if you actually look at his advanced defensive statistics, from PFF, because Pro Football Reference doesn't have it, so you have to have PFF to see it. So I don't blame people for not actually knowing the numbers. You don't have to pay for PFF. That's what we're for, right? But he's gotten better every single year at Ohio State. He finished with 33 total pressures this year at Ohio State, which remember, that's only 13 games also. It's not an NFL season where there's 17 games. There's a lot less games, so keep that in your context. But 6 sacks, it's not bad at all. 33 total pressures, 21 run stops, 86.1 overall PFF grade, and obviously PFF is just one metric, but he had an 85.3 pass rush grade. That's very high. So PFF didn't think he was a bad player. PFF actually thought he was pretty good. So I don't think he's as far off as people think. He certainly needs to get better at finishing some sacks, but definitely had a lot of pressures, and is a good run defender too. Like he's big, long. Um, there's really not. I think this is a guy that's gonna contribute more than people think, and I think early on he doesn't really even need to be active unless he's ready and hits the ground running. But I mean, big. This is your Calais Campbell understudy because they don't know how long Campbell's going to be here. Maybe he's here for another year if things go well. Is able to stay healthy. I know he prides himself on that. But if Campbell elects to retire or sign elsewhere next year, then you got Zach Harrison ready, and I think that's exactly what this pick is. We need our big end. They even may decide that they want a package where they have two big guys out there on base down. So I think the pick is good. It's a high upside pick, and I think that's what you're looking for in the third round. Like you're looking for upside guys. You're looking for guys that you can develop, and I think with the way they've constructed the edge room, you mentioned all the additions they've made, the guys they brought back, the guys they have from last year still, and Ebiketie and Malone, who just seem to be forgotten about entirely. They've got a situation where Harrison can just sit and develop on the inactive list if he needs to, but he might be ready earlier than that. I don't think he's as far away as this sort of general consensus is. So that's an interesting pick. We'll see how quickly it plays out, or if it plays out at all. The third round is kind of a total crapshoot, but I like the idea behind it. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I would for sure agree with that too. And I think, again, as you mentioned, whether or not, he is active, I don't think – I'm sure next offseason, if it's a type of thing where he's a healthy scratch, 5-6 times, it'll be kind of like, well, is he really a long-term piece of the puzzle? You've got to listen to what they're actually saying about him right now, and it's that they don't expect him to legitimately be an impact player year one. And so I think that's kind of more important to look at, kind of to, I guess, just remember for next offseason in particular. But again, I think Zach Harrison, as you mentioned, he is a lot closer and has been a lot more productive than what a lot of people have kind of talked about so far. But I think, in particular with Zach, it's all talent. He's extremely talented. He's very, very talented. He's very athletically gifted, physically gifted. And I think, again, you don't have to play him right away. But if you do, the length and the athleticism there, he's going to be a heck of a special teams player from the start, right? And so to me, that's part of it too. If you want to have him on the field, you can find a role for him on special teams. And so I think that's important to look at as well. But again, I do think that it is important to note that this is a guy who's a very good fit schematically on the field, off the field, with a lot of upside to him. And so I think the Falcons are very excited about him. I think, there's very good reason when you look at his power, and kind of the way that, again, everything kind of just clicked for him this past year. If you feel like you can just kind of keep on adding to what he's already learned at Ohio State and just kind of keep on, as long as you can keep the arrow pointing up, and it looks like it's really pointing up right now, I think you're going to end up being very satisfied with the pick. Yeah,
I think so. And then that brings us, of course, to my favorite pick of the draft in terms of the value. Clark Phillips III, the quarterback out of Utah, who even got the Brett Jukes stamp of approval, which, since given that he's a Utah player and Brett is an avid BYU fan, that is very meaningful. I don't think he generally gives out praise of Utah players lightly. So, what do you think about that pick? It was I think it surprised people that they went for a corner instead of a safety or especially a wide receiver. But I think it's a really interesting one.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I instantly think about with Clark Phillips is just value. And I think really a lot of people expected him to be long gone by pick 113. And, you could see the excitement in the Falcons war room. Obviously, every time a pick is made, it's a lot of claps, a lot of cheers, whatever. But you could see genuine excitement in the war room there. And so I really think they were surprised he made it as far as he did. And I think, on the field, you're looking at a guy who was a unanimous All-American, Pac-12. I think he was AP Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year. Turnover magnet. I mean, he led the Pac-12 in passes defended in 2021 and came back. And I think he was up there pretty highly again this past year. And so, I mean, he's I think he led the Pac-12 in interceptions, if I'm not mistaken, with 6. I mean, he's a turnover magnet. Again, very good ball skills. Again, when you look at the Falcons secondary, it's a lot of guys right now who are very tenacious, is I think the word I would use. You got a lot of feisty guys in there who might not be, I mean, it's not like they're trying to go after a Legion of Boom type of secondary at cornerback. They got all this length and size. That's not what they're trying to do on the outside. And I think a lot of people kind of have this image sometimes where it's like, let's add this big press corner, whatever it might be. But they have a bunch of guys in there who are very quick, very athletic, very intelligent, and compete extremely hard. And, another thing that's very important at corner, obviously, is just having that mentality, having I guess swagger, you could call it, on the outside, inside, wherever it might be. They've got a lot of guys that have that. And I don't think you can, especially at corner, you've got everyone's, even AJ Terrell lost a lot of reps last year. It's a position where it's natural. You're going to lose reps at corner. I mean, it's going to happen everywhere, but especially corner, a lot of your, inopportune or just, I guess, rough reps are kind of emphasized all the more. These are guys who have proven that they are mentally extremely tough, extremely competitive. And I think that's a very important trait as you're trying to establish a roster that's filled with confidence, toughness, and just competitive football players. And so to me, Clark fits the vision. And I think where they got him was outstanding value, might have been the best value pick that they made the entire draft. And so I'm very high on that selection.
Yeah, I think that he will be playing soon. I have total confidence in Clark Phillips. I think he was he was a guy that was getting mocked in the first round early in the process. I think he measured in a few inches shorter than expected and then didn't test crazy good. I mean, his 4.5 40 is still fine. It's still well above average for a corner. And his 10-yard and 20-yard splits were both excellent. So his short to middle area speed is very good. There's no issue there. It's the long speed where it's just above average. He's not, a 4.3 type of guy on the outside. But, it's really just the size. He's 5'9.5" or whatever it is, or 5'9", 185. He's that 185 at 5'9". He's thick. Like it's not like he's this little spindly corner like an Emmanuel Forbes, the needle. Yeah. I mean, what is he, like 6'1", 165? That kid. Yep. He's out there. But Phillips is just so good. Like, I mean, I watch his tape and it's like, okay, I don't know what the issue is here. Like, yeah, he's small, but he was one of the only corners in the Pac-12 that could handle Drake London or even compete with him. He handled Jordan Addison, first-round pick from this year. Handled pretty much everyone else that came up to him, and he was a good tackler and a good run support player. I mean, he's feisty. He's not necessarily going to throw guys back when he hits them, but there's no concern about his ability to make the tackle. So I think fans will be very, very, very happy with this one. I think he's going to find his way onto the field very quickly. I just think you can't keep him off. I think he will find a way to get out there, whether that's in the slot, which he hasn't really played, so that's going to take some time to learn that role. I imagine the Falcons are going to train him in the slot and outside because I think his envisioned role right now is to be the cornerback 4, the sort of first man off the bench, no matter where you need him. And, I wouldn't rule out him supplanting Mike Hughes if his season goes really well. Mike Hughes, UCF legend, like I'm not trying to slander my man, but Clark Phillips is that good that I think he's going to challenge someone's starting spot sooner than later. And if not, just having him as your quarterback 4 is great because he's going to have to play soon. At some point he's going to have to play. It's just the nature of how it goes at corner in the NFL. You need to have at least 4 to 5 good ones. And if your 6th one can be good, that's good too. So I think he's going to have a role early on and be a big time contributor for this team. Yeah. Well, we got 2 7ths to talk about. First one, DeMarco Hellams, the safety out of Alabama. That was an interesting one. They did add the safety. He is sort of that big nickel type guy. Interested your thoughts on the Hellams edition.
Yeah, I liked having the live reaction on that one on the live stream for the third day. That was I look forward to looking back on that one in a few years. One other thing about the live, I went back and I watched the part where my computer froze on the first.
Yeah.
Because I'm mid
Yeah,
It just
it was
flows
great.
out.
Yeah.
That should become meme worthy. But I'm not going to put it out there because I don't want it to become meme worthy.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll try not to remind
Yeah,
people. Yeah.
right. So on the topic of Helms, though, I think really, he's going to remind people of Keanu Neal. I think when they put on, tape or highlights or however you want to evaluate your, picks, however you want to form the image in your head, right? But he's extremely physical. I've obviously watched a lot of Alabama football over the last several years, as have I'm sure a lot of people. And the guy, he got on the field really for the first time in 2020 at safety. And I mean, he always stood out just because of how physical he was. And again, there's not a lot of guys in college that can hit as hard as he could, but also keep it as clean as he did. In the modern era of everybody being ejected for targeting, he was, again, a very reliable player at safety. And again, if you look back and you watch him play against Texas and play against Bijan, there's a few moments there in the hole where it's one-on-one, and he actually handled it fairly well. He got the bad end of some hits from sure. It wasn't as bad as Henry To'oTo'o being stiff-armed into the ground and just left for dead. But, it was – shout out Bijan. But, Helms is, again, very physical player, very reliable tackler with his physicality. I think that's a hard trait as well. And I think that's what's kind of special about him. And, I don't want to hype up a seventh-round pick because he fell for a reason. He's not the most, fluid, athletic, fleet-of-foot football player. But you see a lot of guys that have to really throw their body around to create power and force as a tackler. And with Helms, it's all natural power. It's all just like he is technically sound, he's reliable in space, and he will hit you hard without hesitation, and he does it time and time again. And again, he proved he could cover a little bit in the slot. It wasn't always, pretty, and I'm not sure he's a guy that you want playing single high or anything of that nature. But again, put him in the box, you let him come up and hit people, even if you just let him kind of play a little bit of a rover type of role. I mean, he's going to hit you hard, and he can make an impact. And I do think he'll be a very good special teams player as a result of that, because he can, he's going to be more explosive in a straight line than laterally. And I think if you put him, on teams, he's going to make a very big impact there, just because, again, how good of a tackler he is, how much power he has. And then again, his ability, obviously played at a very, very good program for 4 years. And I believe he led Alabama in tackles in 2022. So again, This is a guy who's a big-time player at a big-time program, and those are the types of guys that in round 7 you feel like have a very safe floor of at least being some type of contributor. In round 7, you're really just looking for a guy who can make the roster and have an impact. And I think Helms will probably make the roster and be able to play on special teams as a rookie.
Yeah, I agree. It says something when you lead Alabama in tackles. They also trusted him to play a lot of spots, and that I think that, Alabama does not put out DBs and trust them to play safety unless they know what they're doing. I think Helms is a lot smarter than people give him credit for. He does have athletic limitations. I don't think you're going to want him playing single high. I mean, Alabama did that sometimes, and the rest of that defense is good enough that he's smart. So he doesn't look unathletic on tape. The testing obviously wasn't great, and in the NFL that's going to get exacerbated. But if you put him in the box, make him play sort of that star linebacker or, sort of big nickel safety role, I think he's going to be a great physical tackler there. The special teams ability is going to be excellent. And I think he's just going to be a really reliable guy that can fill a lot of safety spots in a pinch if you need him to. The upside as like this high-end safety probably is not there due to the athletic limitations, but in terms of his ability to be a reliable depth piece and special teams contributor, I think he's a clear guy that you're like, he's going to make the roster. Like, and that's not always the case with 7th-round picks. Half the time it's like, well, we'll see what happens. But I think with Helms, there's a clear path for him to be the 4th safety and to make this roster and be an instant contributor. And right now, the Falcons have 3 safeties who they like, right? With obviously Jesse Bates, Richie Grant, and Jalen Hawkins. So he doesn't really need to play unless there's an injury. But I think his ability to sort of play any safety spot in a pinch and be a special teamer will lead to him being active probably sooner than later.
Yeah, and the other thing with Helms as well, a very good leader. And again, kind of as you mentioned, if you're getting on the field playing safety at Alabama under Saban, it's a very tough scheme to learn. And again, as you mentioned, I went back and looked at my report on him from a few months ago, and again, instantly smarts, physicality, competitiveness, just how tough he was, all of the intangible traits that, we talk about the new regime is really, I guess it's not new anymore, but, the regime valuing is really present in his game. And again, I think when you're trying to build, I'm going to just keep harping on it. When you're trying to build a collective image or an identity of a team, every pick that you make should embody that. And it's not like, hey, we're just going to take these guys for that reason. It's more of like, these are the types of football players that we want, and this is how our roster will look. Whether it's round 1, pick 8, or round 7, pick 224, we're going to have a collective image of how we want our team to look. And that's what, in my eyes, that's what Helms and then Jovaughn Gwyn accomplish.
Yeah, no, I agree. And speaking of Jovaughn Gwyn, we should touch on that one too. That one surprised me, considering they already added to the offensive line and that there was a lot of competition on the interior already. But they don't feel settled about it, clearly. And Jovaughn Gwyn is a really interesting guy, being just a hair under 6'2", a little bit under 300 pounds. But you wouldn't know it by watching that film. So I don't know if you've had a chance to watch. I hadn't watched Gwyn at all before the pick. I definitely do like his tape. There's not really a lot of issues on tape. The size obviously has led to him falling. But what do you think about Gwyn?
Yeah, I haven't gotten through a full game yet. I did get to a little bit of his game against Georgia because I wanted to see how he kind of handled that. And I thought he did just fine. I thought really, again, you look at the size. I mean, he's got short arms. I think it's like 31 and a quarter-inch arms, obviously very short. But, again, he's inside. Perhaps they'll play him at center. I think Arthur Smith mentioned that they believe there is a chance for him to play a little bit of center. And so really, again, you look at what he did at South Carolina. Again, tremendous leader there, captain, I believe. All of the Falcons draft picks at some point in their college careers were captains, and I think that's again another sign of the character they truly value. But with Gwyn, I guess everybody at that program just raved about him as an individual. I mean, he won a bunch of awards. I mean, a laundry list of awards, whether it be off field, just like strength and conditioning awards or whether it be academic things. I mean, he was a very impactful player in that locker room. I believe he was a 4-year starter as well at South Carolina. I mean, very consistent presence there. Obviously, second team all conference in 2022. I mean, he started, I think it was like 46 consecutive games there to close his career, which very impressive. Obviously shows, again, just how consistent he was there for them. And I think very athletic player is, pretty apparent. He can really pull. He can hit it. He can hit his landmarks. He can really thrive in the wide zone, I think. And I think, you're looking at a guy who can potentially make his way onto the roster with Gwyn just because of how I feel like how well he actually does fit and just he can be functional at guard if you want him there or at center for that matter. And again, we kind of talked about earlier, they've got a lot of bodies inside. And it'll be a lot of fun to kind of watch that play out. But, they've talked a lot about how camp will be very competitive. And I think you had a player in Gwyn who, again, embodies everything they want on and off the field. When you add players like that who played at a very high level for a very long time, all that does is lift up the floor of your team. And it's only going to make that room more competitive and will only uplift everybody else in that room. And again, the more you build quality depth, because again, a lot of teams, it's the NFL. A lot of teams have high level talent. How much high level talent is often, the separator. But having quality depth often is how you win games, especially late in the year, come playoff time. And I think the more that you add players who can really uplift the overall floor of your team, it's really that's how you win games. And so I'm not sure Gwyn will make the roster. I think he's got a fair shot to fight for it. I think, again, it wouldn't shock me if he did. But just I do think that he'll add a sense of value with the way that he's wired that will end up, being quite valuable for the 225th overall pick.
Yeah, and you look at the Falcons, they've if you make the practice squad in Atlanta, you shouldn't view that as like, oh, well, you're just going to hang around for a while then disappear. Like, they've had a pattern now of guys spend a year on the practice squad and then make the roster. Look at Ryan Newsel, spend good amount of the season on the roster after being on the practice squad for a year. They've kept linebackers and had them do that. So him making the practice squad shouldn't be viewed as like, well, that's it, he's a bust. No, the Falcons are serious about the practice squad being a pipeline to the roster. They bring a lot of their guys back year to year to continue developing them. And, I think we'll table the UDFA discussion just because we're almost at an hour and we got several months to kill before we actually get to training camp. So we'll come back to that. But I think it's interesting who they have, and these draft editions I think have been really savvy. But before we sign off, I do want to give you a chance to give your thoughts sort of on the collective class, and how do you feel now that we have the, I guess technically 89-man roster, relatively set?
Yeah, I wonder who pick 90 will be, or player 90 will be. Corey
Maybe
Davis.
Penny Hart. Maybe Penny Hart. They visited with him today, right? So
Penny Hart, yeah. He's just warming up the spot for Corey Davis is all. No, but
yeah, that would just for me to be right. I think I need to to have that. But
very, very good for the brand. 2023 draft class. I think, again, you look at very shared characteristics between, each player: captain, leader, tough, competitive, instinctual. These are all things that Fontenot and Smith have preached about for years by now. And it feels like throughout the whole offseason, all they've done is strengthen the identity that they've been trying to build. They felt coming into the offseason, very strong culture. And I think all they've done is kind of help add to that. And I think you'll probably get 3 players who should start relatively early. Obviously, Robinson, Matthew Bergeron should start probably week 1 is the expectation there. I think Clark Phillips has a very good chance of starting relatively early, whether it's week 1 or not. We'll kind of see how that plays out in camp, but I think he'll have a shot at it for sure. Zach Harrison, I think you have to love the upside there. I really do. I think, at pick 75, you have a chance to, draft a guy who a few years ago was thought of as a first-round talent. And I mean, really off of raw talent, he probably is a first-round type of talent just with all of his tools and everything he has to work with. Again, not a first-round player quite yet, but still, you can see the upside there, the vision. And then again, working in round 7, as we just kind of talked about, you've got 2 guys there in Helms and Gwyn who can, contend for the roster. Helms, I think, has a very good chance of actually making the roster. And you kind of look at it like, hey, these are guys who can legitimately help our team and can uplift the floor of our team. And so I think it was overall a very good draft class. I think with Bijan, again, unless something just disastrous happens to him, he's going to be a very good pro. And I think Bijan has a chance single-handedly to help the Falcons win football games. I think he will be an incredibly valuable football player. I think he has a very good chance of winning Offensive Rookie of the Year. And again, I don't think it's going to be the type of deal where we look back in 5 years and say, how'd they draft that guy? I think it's going to be like, man, that was a very good decision. And again, I think there's a very good chance the Falcons walk out of this draft class with 3, if not 4 potential starters and a few special teams assets as well.
Yeah, and that's what you're going for. I think you're looking for 2 to 3 starters, and you're hoping for more than that. But I think that's a reasonable expectation for this group, considering who they got. And it's really just sort of a wait and see, I think, on Zach Harrison to see if he can become what they want him to become. But I certainly like the upside there. Yeah, Daniel, it's been great. Once again, guys, he is Daniel Flick at DFlickDraft. Anything you want to plug before we sign off today?
I guess you can find my articles at si.com/NFL/Falcons. As we talked about on the live show, I have been known from time to time to write an okay article. So those are on there. Those are, obviously got a lot of draft content coming out. Pretty soon we'll get to OTAs and all that stuff. And I'm sure that the Falcoholic Live pod will be popping. So
yeah. Of course. Always popping. Yeah. Well, we're getting close to, now we entered the quiet period after we do all these draft recaps, and then we'll have to try to that's when it becomes really exciting. Can get to, some other podcast topics then that people have been clamoring for, but might emphasize the brews aspect of the pod a little bit more during those months. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in with us today. I'm Kevin at Falcoholic Kevin. Remember to check out the show Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern as well. We'll be having lots of these draft and off-season recaps coming out over the next week because I will be on vacation. But the content will keep flowing because, I do this thing called time travel where I record something and then I publish it while I'm gone, and it makes it seem like it came out, while I was on vacation. But, technically I recorded it before the vacation. So, don't worry about me overworking while I'm supposed to be on vacation. But appreciate everyone for hanging out on the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast presented by Bet Online. We will see you next time, guys. Have a great day.